On this episode, we're going to go over the Delaque gang tactics and Psychoteric Whisper's abilities.
Dome Runners TV, your guide to the Underhive and beyond.
Hey there, Scabby Scummers and Gangers, Crimson Oracle here with another episode of Dome Runners TV. Today we are going to be talking House Delaque and their special abilities. I have already done a few of these videos. I'm planning on knocking out all the rest of the house gangs and doing a bit more content on each gang, including going over their background and various other things. So for today, we are talking about Psychoteric Whispers and House Delaque. We're hoping to get an overview of the different abilities and my thoughts on how useful they are. Of course, if you have your own opinions, I would love to hear them. Leave a comment about which of these abilities you like and how you might consider comboing them. What fighters, what kind of gear, what you would like to do. And, maybe if you drop something that I like, we'll talk about it in a future episode talking about House Delaque tactics. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that. And with that, we're going to jump straight into the episode. So let's get talking. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's how we get new viewers and how we get new supporters and how the show grows. And of course, we have a Patreon for $2 a month, which is, I think, a very reasonable price to help keep this show running. Psychoteric Whispers are Delaque's special thing. Every one of the house gangs has their own special mechanic that makes them unique. And for House Delaque, it is their psychic tree. So Psychoteric Whispers are a class of special weird powers that are used by House Delaque. To access them, the fighter must be upgraded to be a Psyker. It's an option for Master of Shadow, Phantom, and Noctghoul fighters, and it comes with the Psygeist and Piscean Spectre, as well as a few other units. For fighters who have this option, it's a 30 credit upgrade, so you can buy the option to make them a Psyker in the purchase step, and that includes fighters that you recruit after your first round, as well as fighters that you add at the beginning of gang creation. A fighter that's already in the gang can make a advancement that costs 7 XP in order to gain Psychoteric Mastery and Non-Sanctioned Psyker. Fighters who use an advance to gain extra powers from their discipline or other disciplines from Book of the Outcast follow exactly the same process as gaining a skill. 6 XP, you get a random roll on one of the 3 trees. 9 XP, you get to choose, or I suppose it's for more than just the 3 trees. And this is a recent ruling that came in one of the FAQ updates that allows the second power that a Delaque fighter takes to be from the Book of the Outcast trees. Unfortunately, you don't gain the specialization from staying in one tree that the fighter would otherwise get, but it's worth it to have a Delaque fighter who's able to turn the lights off. Psychoteric Mastery is one of the rules gained by a fighter who purchases the upgrade. They are made a Psyker and can choose one of the 3 disciplines to specialize in and generate a power from it. The Psychoteric Choir rule means that every Delaque fighter is attuned to aid their gang's Psykers in casting, so when a Delaque fighter, including a House Agent, Piscean Spectre, or Spiker, uses a Psychoteric Whisper, for each friendly Delaque fighter that's standing and not engaged within 3 inches, increase the range of the power by 1 inch to a maximum of 3. This is an extremely potent ability, as it means that running a few folks nearby your Psyker allows you to seriously boost the very short range powers that the Delaques have. The Delaque house pet, the Psychoteric Worm, is also interacting with the psychic powers for your Delaques. It enables a Psyker to extend their casting range by using the worm as the originating point of their powers, as long as it's not engaged or seriously injured. A Psyker can channel a power to a worm within 12 inches, although if perils are rolled, the Psyker suffers the results instead. This is a really nifty ability because, as earlier mentioned, a lot of the powers are very short range. The ones that act within an inch, really though, on the worm, you can only use them to deliver those if you have Psychoteric Choir boosting the range, as the worm can't be the focal point if they are engaged. So keep that in mind. If you choose to take powers that only activate at 1 inch, you're going to get a lot less use out of a worm than you would otherwise. But really, this is one of the best gang pets because it synergizes so well with what the gang does. I definitely haven't spec'd heavily into psychic powers on my Delaque, but if you do, the worms are really a crucial addition. Now for the powers. So the first tree, the first discipline is Madness, and these are abilities that are going to mess with your opponent's fighters' minds. The first power is Existential Barrage, which is a simple action. Target is one enemy fighter within 1 inch. The fighter makes an intelligence check. If failed, they become broken and immediately flee, and after moving, any friendly fighters within 5 inches must pass a nerve test or also become broken. So this is a very powerful ability in that it can trigger a explosion of nerve tests, which is fantastic, but the downside is that your fighter has to be within an inch of an enemy in order to use it, which means that you've probably survived reaction attacks if you charge them, or you've been charged if they charged you, and that is generally speaking not where most of your psychers want to be, but this could be really useful, for example, on one of the more close combat oriented fighters like a Noctghoul, or on a Piscean Spectre, or what have you. Terrible Truths, which is a basic ability, and it targets an enemy fighter within 3 inches. The fighter makes an intelligence check, and if failed, they gain the Insane condition. So this is a good one. It is a little bit, dependent on what your opponent's intelligence looks like, but a lot of fighters have really poor intelligence, especially the lower level fighters, the Juves and the Gangers. It can really mess with somebody to have an important fighter go insane at the wrong moment. Insane is a fun rule, and there aren't that many opportunities to use it, so I definitely like this power, but it is not as directly useful, I think, as some of the other powers. It's more just a fun way to cause one of the better mechanics in the game. Number 3, we got Psychoteric Lore. The target is an enemy fighter with a ready marker within 3 inches of the psyker. The opposing player must activate the fighter next, and they cannot perform a group activation. Let's be real, this is damn useful. Forcing your enemy to make a choice that they may not be planning to make, especially one that costs them perhaps the opportunity to activate someone else. This is awesome, and especially with the Psychoteric Worm, you can extend that range out. If you're using a Choir and a Worm, you could potentially be disrupting fighters who are significantly further away, on the order of like 18 inches away. So, and the Worm can go under walls and stuff. So even like in a corridor mission, the Worm can dig their way to the opponent's side and be blasting fighters to prevent them from activating in the order that they want to, which is a really great tool for manipulating people's personal, their action economy, which is a whole thing with Delaque, to kind of throw your opponent off, which I really like about them. It's very thematic. Number 4 is Cyclopean Gaze, which is a double action. The target is an enemy fighter with a ready marker within 1 inch. The fighter immediately loses their ready marker. So again, this is a good one on a more close combat oriented fighter like, your Noctghoul, or like a Piscean Spectre, or what have you. But it is not as useful for someone who you're trying to keep out of the way of combat. But extending it with the Psychoteric Whispers does mean that you could potentially be doing it to someone who is 4 inches away, or with the Worm, it could be someone who's 16 inches away. So there is a way to make this a significantly more mean choice. Craven Howl. This is a basic action. This is a continuous effect one, which means that you can maintain it each turn. Broken enemy fighters cannot attempt to rally within 5 inches. So this is one of the ways that the Delaque powers synergize well with each other. So the first power in Madness allows you to cause a bunch of fighters to break. The fifth power in Madness allows you to force those enemies not to rally. So if you are properly, going all in on psychic powers, you could potentially be, triggering these big events that sort of take your opponent's fighters out of the game, and it can be a really useful way to sort of shift the balance in the game. And again, it's more synergy, which is this gang's whole thing. And finally, we have Unremembered Utterances, which is a simple action. It's a continuous effect power. All enemy fighters who activate within 3 inches can only perform one action. And if you extend this out to 6 inches, oh baby. And if you are using the worm and you're putting your worm out into harm's way, you can really, really disrupt some stuff, especially considering it's a continuous effect power, which means that you can continue using it into the next turn and continue to manifest it, whereas most of the other powers, they go off at the end of the turn. Delusion is the next tree, and it has to do with deceiving your opponents. The first option is Spatial Psychosis, which is a simple action. The target is an enemy fighter within 12 inches that's standing and not engaged. The target immediately becomes pinned. If within half an inch of a ledge or platform, it may cause them to fall. This is a great power. Being able to take someone who is potentially a charge threat to someone important in your gang and drop them and potentially throw them off a ledge, it's crucial. It could absolutely cause major disruption in your opponent's game plan. This is a good one. Next up, we have Seen Unseen, which is a basic power. It's continuous effect. You choose an enemy fighter within 3 inches. While the power is maintained, the chosen fighter treats all fighters as enemy fighters, and all fighters treat them as an enemy fighter. Any rule, special or otherwise, that affects friendly fighters or friendly faction fighters ceases to work for the chosen fighter. So this one is a little more situational. It depends on your opponent needing to use aura effects, but it can really mess with someone if they happen to be relying on an aura in order to, for example, prevent a fighter from falling due to the arms master giving them nerves of steel. This can turn that off. But it's situational, so I wouldn't necessarily take it as a power that's going to be always a game changer. Get your important stuff selected first, and if you're going with a lot of psychers, then Delusion might be a fun one to throw in. Next, we have Deceitful Thoughts, which is a double action. The target is enemy fighter within 5 inches. The fighter makes an intelligence check. If failed, you move that fighter up to their move characteristic in any direction other than somewhere harmful, like off a ledge, etc. So this is, again, a great way to throw your opponent off. Being able to take a fighter who's 5 or potentially 8 inches away, or with the worm even further, can really disrupt a planned charge. It can put them in harm's way, taking them out of cover, allowing you to get them shot to heck. It really is a nifty ability. The only downside is that it is a double action, which means that your fighter is not going to be doing much else. But that's sometimes an acceptable sacrifice. So I wouldn't necessarily take this as like my first or second power, but it is a really useful one. And it's one that I would definitely consider using, for example, with the Tactics card that allows you to generate a power. Being able to kind of toss that out there is a really fun and unexpected ability. Next up, we have Pseudocidal Embrace, which is another basic action. The target is enemy fighters within 3 inches. The fighter makes an intelligence check. If it's failed, resolve a single close combat attack against themselves with one of their melee weapons chosen at random. If the fighter has no weapons, they make an unarmed attack against themselves. It automatically hits. So this one is, perhaps not the best, but it certainly is fun. The chance of someone, potentially chopping their own leg off with a sword or something because you caused their deepest, darkest fears and anxieties to come bubbling up is, really, it's thematic for Delaque, but also kind of like horrible and just kind of mean, and I think it really suits them. So this is one I definitely would consider taking. Next we have Opprobrious Curse, which is a simple action. The target is an enemy fighter within 3 inches. The fighter makes a toughness check. If failed, they suffer a flesh wound. Let's be real. Being able to put a flesh wound on someone is always a good idea because it drops their toughness. And then, once their toughness is dropped, you can cast the spell on them again, and it's going to be even easier to wound them the next time. So definitely this is one of my favorites of all of the powers, and it can be a great way to kind of target and winnow down your opponents, especially if you're using a worm. And now we have the Darkness Discipline. This is all about manipulating sight. So we have Cacophony of Silence, which is a double action. Continuous effect. All enemy fighters within 5 inches of the Psyker must reroll successful hit rolls when making a ranged attack. Pop that out to 8 inches of the Psyker, and suddenly you are, clearing whole rooms of fighters, making sure that they have to reroll all of their hit rolls, which can be a real pain, especially when fighters have, potentially a 4-up to hit roll. This is one definitely to consider if you are running your Psyker with a bunch of supporting fighters who are also providing the Psychoteric Choir, because the double action essentially means that the fighter is not going to be able to do anything else while they are running Cacophony of Silence. So you need other people to get the job done, otherwise they're going to get gunned down and the power is going to turn off. Next we have Penumbral Mirror, a basic action. The target is 1 enemy fighter and 1 friendly fighter within 5 inches. You move the friendly fighter to any point within 5 inches of the enemy fighter. They may even move into base contact. This one is nifty. If you use it properly, you could potentially put someone into close combat at the right time and get them, the ability to really slash at someone without their opponent, for example, being able to shoot at them on their way over. It is a cool and kind of thematic, and I really like this one. I definitely would consider taking this one if I was running, a bunch of fighters in close together around a Psyker. Next we have a Perfect Void, basic. It's a continuous effect, and the Psyker counts as being in full cover to all enemies within 10 inches. So this is a good one for a Psyker who is, trying to do something else with their other action. So if you have it on, for example, a leader or a champion, and you want them to be able to gun and also avoid being, shot up by people who are standing nearby, this is a great one. Getting full cover is extremely useful. Next we have Eternal Slumber, which is a double action. The target is all seriously injured enemy fighters within 3 inches, and it causes all of them to go out of action. So this one is mean and can be very effective, but it's pretty situational. It depends on you having a lot of people down, but who haven't been cooed, which isn't necessarily that common. So it kind of depends on your play style and how often you're finding that situation is annoying. I will say that there have definitely been times where I've been in base contact with 2 or 3 fighters who are seriously injured, and I wanted to be able to take all of them out, but I can only coup one of them. If I had this fighter coming up behind me, they could potentially do all of that with one action. Well, with one double action. Next, we have Cloak of Whispers, which is a basic action. It's a continuous effect. The Psyker and all friendly Delaque fighters within 3 inches of them cannot be targeted of or affected by any gang tactics played by the enemy player. This is perhaps one of my least favorite of the abilities, just because you really only get affected by enemy tactics cards every so often, and it's hard to predict how often that's going to be when you're choosing powers. If it's one of those ones that I would potentially take if you were noticing that tactics cards were being used in kind of an abusive fashion, but it doesn't necessarily even rein in all of the powerful tactics cards, so I'm not even sure it's good for that. Other people may disagree, of course. If you have a use for Cloak of Whispers, I would love to hear it. And finally, we have Sight Blight, which is a basic action. Its continuous effect, all enemy fighters within 5 inches of the Psyker count as being affected by pitch black. And again, this is a great little Delaque kind of rule. If you extend that range out, it can really seriously disrupt your opponent's plans and find them getting, ganked by knocked ghouls and whatnot. So I really like Sightblight. Now that's it for the psychic powers. I would love to hear your thoughts on them. What powers have you found to be really useful, and what ones have you been avoiding? Leave a comment on the video if you want to share that info. Next up, we have the tactics cards, and these are all, bonuses that you're going to be encountering, whether you are playing them randomly or picking them yourself. There are some that really work well when you're having the choice to sort of choose them, and some that I probably would only use if I happen to randomly draw them. The first one is shape-shifting. Play when a friendly Delaque fighter becomes seriously injured. Remove the seriously injured fighter and replace them with a member of the gang not currently on the battlefield. The seriously injured fighter goes into recovery. This one is a lot of fun. You're not necessarily going to have every fighter on the battlefield in every game, and if you have someone who didn't make it in and suddenly someone goes down, this can be a game changer because essentially it gives you a whole new fighter in place of someone who was already in position and getting killed, and now you've got someone new in their place. And that can really mess with your opponent's plans, which is sort of Delaque's whole thing. Next up, we have disquieting susurration. Play when a Delaque fighter fails their willpower check to perform a weird power. You may reroll the failed check. You have to accept the results of the second roll. So another great one. If you are using a lot of psychic powers, this is definitely one that I would consider choosing to take, because you're probably going to fill your willpower at the most crucial and important moment. That's my experience anyway. Next up, we have Shifting Shadows. Play when activating a Delaque fighter. The fighter may be moved anywhere within 4 inches of its current location. So this is a great one because your opponent will probably be expecting, for example, your knocked ghoul to stay in one place, and being able to shoot them forward 4 inches may extend their threat range. Or if you happen to have someone with a web gun who wouldn't necessarily be in range of a group of fighters, but you can shoot them forward 4 extra inches, you might get a much more devastating attack off. So again, one of my favorites in the deck. Maddening Voices. Play when an opponent activates one of their fighters. They must make a willpower check at -1 for each Delaque fighter within 3 inches. If failed, the fighter immediately becomes insane. So this is a good one because you are definitely going to encounter situations where you have a few fighters together around an opponent. It might be an opponent who's particularly powerful and coming at your guys. And being able to make them insane is just hilarious. Insane is a really fun mechanic, and I try to use it as much as possible. So definitely one I would consider, but not necessarily the most high utility of the options because it's fairly situational. Faces in the Gloom. Play when an enemy performs a shoot basic action, -D3 to the fighter's hit roll. This is an obvious one. If there's a crucial moment where, a heavy weapon is pointed at one of your fighters or what have you, this is a great way to disrupt it and shut your opponent down. So definitely worth taking. Definitely one I would consider if my opponent is relying a lot on shooting. Whispered Threats. Play when an enemy gang makes its first bottle test. Roll 2d6 for the bottle test. So this one is one that is so good that I would not take it on a regular basis, because bottling can be one of the most frustrating mechanics in the game, and in general I'm not trying to cause extreme frustration in my opponents. So if you use this a lot, people will just continue to lose games that they feel like they otherwise should have won, which will potentially create some bad feelings, but this is a very nifty ability. Distrust. Play at the start of the battle after deployment but before the first round. Choose an opposing ganger or juve. Fighters belonging to both gangs treat that fighter as an enemy. The opposing player still treats this fighter as part of their crew for the purpose of activation, but otherwise they're treated as an enemy. So this is similar to one of the psychic powers, but it goes into effect for all game. This can really mess with your opponent. You get to, essentially remove a aura benefit of some kind. It's not necessarily going to work with every gang because not every gang needs to interact with each other, but it is definitely something that can throw your opponent's game plan off. The only limitation being, of course, that it has to be pointed at a ganger or a juve, so you can't use it on a champion or even a prospect according to the writing. So there is that. I would call this middle of the pack. It's definitely not my favorite power, but there are many situations where it could be very useful. A debt to pay. Play at the start of the battle after deployment but before the first round. Choose an opposing ganger or juve. For this battle, they must take a willpower check before they can make a charge double action, targeting an enemy Delaque fighter. If failed, the fighter cannot perform the action and must declare another. Okay, so this one is kind of similar to the last one in that it is limited to a ganger or juve, which means that it's not quite as high utility as something that can affect any enemy fighter. But the fact that you essentially make a charge significantly less likely, especially on a fighter that's likely to have a low willpower score overall, it is a fun thing that you can do to mess with your opponent, especially if they like to use screeners to get into battle first. It can really throw them off. Blinding Revelations. Play when a friendly Delaque fighter is taken out of action by a close combat attack or coup de grace. Before removing the fighter, place a 5-inch blast marker centered on the fighter. All fighters touched by this marker act as if hit by a flash weapon. This is a good one, particularly if you, like me, like to employ infiltrators behind enemy lines with your Delaque. Being able to get someone into a hairy situation with a bunch of enemies, say shooting off a web gun in close quarters and then getting charged and stabbed. This allows you to further mess with those fighters, potentially costing them an entire turn from the flash effect. Next we have Cloying Darkness. Play when an enemy fighter does a fight basic action. They get minus D3 to hit. Not bad. Not bad at all. Being able to disrupt an opponent when they are perhaps about to take out someone important is a great way to keep your important people alive, or even just extend combat out for a turn and allow your other fighters to respond. Next we have Deceit. Play during the priority phase after roll for priority but before readying. You may reverse the priority roll. Obviously very useful if there's a significant moment where you're trying to get your person who's in position to attack first before your opponent has a chance to take them out. This is a perfect opportunity to do that. You could also force your opponent to activate first when they have no actions they can take against you, causing them to kind of move their fighters and giving you the opportunity to respond. Obviously, it kind of depends on your personal strategy, but it is, an option and something that makes this particular ability very useful. Next, Snakes in the Dark. Play immediately before deployment. If you deploy your gang first, you may redeploy any number of your fighters after your opponent's deployment. Your fighters must still follow the deployment rules. So this is a good one if you're being forced to deploy first and then your opponent deploys based off of where you are. Being able to reshuffle everyone to the locations that you want can be very powerful and really throw off their game plan. I have used this a few times, and I wouldn't use it all the time because people may find it frustrating. And of course, if you use it all the time, you will essentially teach people to go for more of a castle kind of deployment, and as a result, you'll get less utility out of the card, but it will force your opponent to behave predictably, and there is benefit in that. Next, we have Whisperer. Play at the start of the battle, after deployment, but before the first round. Choose a friendly Delaque fighter in your starting crew. That fighter gains the Psychoteric Mastery and non-sanctioned Psyker rules, and knows one Psychoteric Whisper of your choice. This is obviously a fantastic card. Being able to just throw powers out there with this ability is awesome, especially if you're already running a lot of Psychers. Having a few more, this is a great card. Shooting at Shadows. Play when a friendly Delaque fighter is hit by an enemy ranged attack. Roll a d6. On a 2-up, the hit has no effect. On a 1, they're affected, but this gang tactic is not discarded. You have to love a gang tactic card that allows you to reuse it if it doesn't go off. I mean, that is just, that's fantastic. And having a 5/6 chance to avoid a ranged attack can be extremely crucial. This one is almost better than the -D3 ability that we mentioned earlier, because it is, having no effect at all. So being able to, for example, dodge a template that would otherwise be a problem, that is a great way to get out of it. Sight blind traps. Play, instead of activating a fighter, place a sight blind trap within 2 inches of one of your fighters. Roll a d6 when it goes off. On a 4-up, it's a real trap. So the traps are always kind of hit or miss for me. It really depends on the mission. If you're playing in a way where you can kind of control your opponent's movement, it can really be fun. If you happen to have psychic powers that allow you to move fighters, you can force them to go off, but they are always a little bit dicey. So the only way that I would, generally speaking, use them is with a tactics card, because otherwise they're just not worth the price to me because of how unreliable they are. Shadow Fast. Play when a friendly Delaque fighter takes an enemy fighter out of action with an attack from a charge double action. If no longer engaged, they may make a free move simple action. If engaged, they may make a free fight action. So this is a great one if you are using your Noctghoul, for example, to charge into combat and hit multiple people. Being able to have them hit someone and then immediately make another free fight basic action, you can seriously mow down some folks. So definitely one to consider. Web traps. Play, instead of activating a fighter, place a web trap anywhere within 2 inches of your fighters. When triggered, roll a d6. On a 4-up, it's a real trap, as detailed in the rules for hidden traps. So again, the traps are a little bit hit or miss, but they are thematic and fun, and if you have powers that can kind of force people to go places, it's a lot of fun. If you're playing in some Mortalis games, they're a lot of fun, but not one I would necessarily choose. And finally, we have Confusion. Play at the start of the battle, after deployment, but before the first round. Choose an opponent's fighter that is on the battlefield and place a marker on their fighter card. Choose one of their melee weapons. When the fighter uses the weapon, they must make an intelligence check. If they fail, the fighter's weapon skill is treated as 6-up for that weapon during this activation. So this is a nifty one if your opponent has a particularly mean close combat fighter who relies on one unwieldy weapon, or who relies on a melee pistol combination. Being able to make it so it's significantly harder for them to hit you with it is absolutely hysterical. It's so frustrating for the other person. It essentially takes that fighter out of their focused ability range and puts them in kind of a no man's land. So I really like it a lot, and definitely one that you can deploy to great effect. So I would definitely consider taking this one. And there we have it. That is the Delaque Tactics cards. We went over all the psychic powers and all the tactics cards. Delaque is definitely the gang to run if you are looking for a sort of cohesive and fitting together faction. I would seriously recommend them if that's what you're looking for. And if you are not trying to make these sort of devious moves, you might want to go for one of the more straightforward gangs, because you will probably have some clash with your gang playing Delaque. And as always, thank you to my patrons. You guys help me make these videos and keep me on the air. And of course, you too can become a patron for as little as $2 a month. It is a very easy to afford option for folks, so check that out. And of course, if you are interested in more Necromunda stuff, I have a podcast which you can find on Buzzsprout, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, you can find the Dome Runners. And of course, everybody out there, stay safe and don't forget to change your paint water.